So welcome everybody to episode 2 of Boxing Book Club on MACKLIN'S Take, this new venture that I started up last week. I'm Andy Clark and my special guest today is John Dennen, and we will be getting to our picks in just a second. How it's going to work for this one is that John will make 2 selections and I will make 1. So 3 a week as usual. And as I explained last week, this is a revival really of something that I started doing during the first lockdown. And that time it was on Twitter. I just recorded a video recommending 3 books, tossed it out there, hoping other people would get involved, and they did. And it was great. You know, we had people coming back with all sorts of stuff. I picked up about 20, 25 new titles that I bought over a gradual period of time that I'd not even heard of, some of them, and thoroughly enjoyed all of them. So I just thought it'd be worth giving this another try and just expanding it a bit, hence having a guest, an esteemed author on the on episode 2. Don't worry though, like I said, we will get to our picks first up. So if you can't bear the idea of listening to me and John for another however many minutes, and you just want to get the recommendations out of the way, then we're sympathetic to that. We're sympathetic to that, aren't we, John? We understand.
Very much so. Yeah, exactly. Like, I wormed my way on to episode 1 of the book club. I was quick off the draw to invite myself on, but I appreciate some people might not want to listen to me babbling on for half an hour, so I can get straight in to my 2 selections.
Well, it's a very immediate kind of medium, isn't it? YouTube. It's kind of just, it's instant delivery. That's what people are after. So, with that in mind, I mean, this is the inaugural episode in many ways, because last week was quite short, just throwing a few recommendations out there, and I think people will look back on this, John, in years to come. I think the boxing media will look back upon this in years to come, and will think to themselves that this was okay. That wasn't bad. I think.
And what more could you possibly?
Yeah, they'll think that definitely could have been worse.
Yeah, those 2 have done worse things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, right. So let's get cracking. So you've got 2 recommendations. Hit me with them.
So first up, which I had to choose, is George Plimpton's Shadowbox, if that's come up. This is my copy. But I think Yellow Jersey Press, a very good publisher of literary sports writing, have a newer version that's out in the UK. And my second recommendation is Flame of Pure Fire, Jack Dempsey and the Roaring Twenties by Roger Kahn.
Those are 2 very, very solid choices, really solid choices. I always, when John tipped me off yesterday that they were the 2 that he'd gone for, I was in a state of immediate kind of intellectual arousal, because
I agonised about my choices, because whittling down to 2 favourite boxing books is a big call. And I think Shadowbox is my favourite boxing book, but it's a close run thing, because there are 2 books, throwing some extra recommendations: The Fight by Norman Mailer and King of the World by David Remnick. 2 our lead books are the sort of books that maybe you want to be a boxing writer. But I think I prefer Shadowbox. And then this Flame of Pure Fire, I read more recently, but I was really blown away by it. I just thought it was really good. I love Jack Dempsey. Love that period of American history in the 1920s. But
you're singing my song here, John. You're singing my song big time. We'll get into those in a little bit more detail in a second. But just so we can get recommendation number 3 out there. Recommendation number 3 is on this bookcase behind us. Which book could it be? I Hear You Cry. So if you look down here, you might think, oh, Dark Trade by Don McRae. That's a front runner, you would think, wouldn't you? You think that's could easily be that one. You would be wrong. Nestled in next to it. What have we got here? What have we got here? I didn't even have to rearrange the bookcase to do this, actually. It was originally naturally in that slot. Joshua,
yes,
by John Dennen. There you go.
John Dennen alongside Don McRae on your bookshelf. That is a place.
Not bad, is it?
That's the hardback. There's also a paperback version, which is particularly good. This version finishes with him beating Klitschko at Wembley Stadium in an epic tale.
That absolutely is an
rags to
epic tale.
riches.
That absolutely is. So we'll get into that because we need to talk to you about the process of writing a book and all of that kind of thing, because it is something I'm
Because
really
I
interested
only
in.
agreed to appear on this if you recommended my book.
Yeah,
The
basically,
whole
yeah.
thing is a stitch up.
Yeah. I mean, it's a thinly veiled mutual exploitation theme going on here. Really, is what's happening. But it's it is genuinely a really good read. This. It's always more interesting when you read a book written by somebody you know, and there are some there's some personal bits in there. There's a kind of, you bring yourself into it just a little bit, which I was pleased you did, because I think it definitely does add to it. But let's get back to your two recommendations. So,
Well, that bit in my book about my own efforts at boxing were kind of a little homage to Shadowbox, because George Plimpton in this, try. A lot of the book is about Muhammad Ali and his relationship with him, but he also tries out boxing himself, and it's so it's my version's subtitled "An Amateur in the Ring." It's hilarious when Plimpton's training is like a jog in Central Park and reading books about boxing in a library. It's hilarious, but that sort of gave me the confidence to slip in a little bit about my own very, very limited direct experience of the sport.
but that's what's so interesting about what he writes in the book, and it goes off in all sorts of directions and covers lots of different things. But probably the main premise of it is the fact that he's going to get in there as a average Joe and try and go a few rounds with Archie Moore, and he does this in a few other books that he's written, which are also really good. He wrote one called Paper Lion, which sees him go behind the scenes with an NFL team back in the 50s and see if he can get on and play a couple of plays in a preseason game. Similar thing in baseball, ice hockey, golf. People weren't really writing these kinds of books then, these kinds of inside track, fly on the wall type things. No one was really doing it. And I don't think anyone really did it in football here until that book about Spurs, the Glory Game, I think. And that was in the early 70s. So he's sort of kind of ahead of his time, George Plimpton, wasn't he? And just an ace writer. I mean, how would you describe his style?
But yeah, he is a brilliant writer, but he's also even though he called it participatory journalism, him getting involved in these sports, but he's not as ego driven as some of the other writers of the time. Norman Mailer's The Fight. I love it as a boxing book, but you very much know it's by and partly about Norman Mailer. Whereas
Absolutely,
even though Plimpton is trying to do boxing or trying to do American football, he's very self-effacing and funny, but also he's involved, but he's also observing. He's not the center of the story. The characters he's meeting and getting to know through their sport, through their profession, is kind of what it's about. So I think it's quite unique, because I don't think I've ever read anyone like Plimpton.
No, I would agree, and yeah, what you just said there is absolutely bang on, because that for me is the mark of a man with real confidence, that he doesn't feel the need to put himself in the middle of everything. Mailer and Hemingway, who feature in the book, and there's some very funny episodes that he recounts about them. One in particular about thumb wrestling, if I recall correctly. Those are a pair of raging egomaniacs. Doesn't mean they weren't brilliant writers, but they were just self-obsessed to the extent that a lot of people are, who kind of caught attention or the limelight, but not Plimpton. There's no self-importance about his writing, and that's what's so great about it, because he's genuinely really funny. And you just imagine, don't you, that he would just be a great bloke to go to the pub with.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. He's someone who's come. When you read his books, you like being in his company, and I'm sure that would be the case in real life. Whereas a Hemingway book is, many of them are masterpieces, but he's not someone you'd like to sit down for a cup of tea with necessarily. There's a hilarious bit in Shadowbox where sort of, because a part of the book is not only about the boxers, it's also about writers and really really amazing writers who were involved in boxing, maybe because they liked it, maybe because they wanted to be a bit of a boxer like Hemingway seemed to be. And there's a great episode in Shadowbox where I think he asks Hemingway like the wrong question or something that irritates him, and then the next day at lunch, when Hemingway hears that Plimpton's going to try and box himself, decides to get up and he wants to sort of see what Plimpton's got, and Plimpton describes him like sort of menacingly approaching him, and his own efforts to like diffuse the tension and get him to like describe his technique rather than punching him. It's just hilarious, but it shows what a kind of character Hemingway was as well.
Oh God, they sounded like an absolute nightmare. I mean, just being stuck in a lift with either one of those two would. But it reminds me of some people I know. I'm not gonna. Oh, I'd love to mention some names, but I'm not going to. But there's plenty of them around. There's plenty of them around in the media. Don't worry about that. I loved it. I absolutely love it. A really good alternative take on the Rumble in the Jungle too, because that's a fight that's been written. I was going to say written to death, but a lot of the writing about it's been so good that wouldn't really be an appropriate way to describe it. But he gets he finds a different way into it than anyone else I've read writing about that fight.
Yeah, and it's also amazing that so many incredible writers were kind of around at that time. I know kind of boxing was a different beast back then, and I guess all the best writers in the world wanted to write about Muhammad Ali, but he was out there in Africa with Hunter S. Thompson, Norman Mailer, and so he writes about them as well. So it's not like that anymore, is it?
No. That definitely did seem to be the golden era, and also with that generation of writers. And I think this is something that people do need to understand, is that the access they got was absolutely unbelievable, and the kind of indulgence they got from editors as well was off the charts compared to what you would get now. So I'm not trying to do down writers of that generation by any stretch, but you could make the argument that if your newspaper editor or magazine editor was prepared to send you out to a fight for 3 weeks and Muhammad Ali's running an open house, Jesus, if you can't write something good when you've got those kind of conditions, then you probably need to go and do something else, don't you? I mean, it's easy. It's easy for me to say that because I'm not on your side of the fence, but I mean, that is fair comment, that I think.
I think so. Yeah, and I was just thinking that it's amazing that Muhammad Ali would just sit down for ages, 20 minutes, an hour, ages chatting with all these writers, and just, there were no like flunkies getting in the way or limiting their access. Ali would just hang out with all these writers and give them amazing copy. Like, as a writer, you couldn't go wrong with that. But it's just amazing to think that it was like that then. Just got to kick back with Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, and with the fight out. Exactly, and with the fight getting delayed in the way it did, I mean, some of them were out there for about 5 or 6 weeks. So. Yeah, I mean, well, let's move on to your second one. I mean, it's a great book, that it really is. It's tremendous, and if you're into just sport generally as well as boxing, read that and then get hold of the other ones, because they're all exactly the same. And it doesn't even really matter if you're wild. I mean, I'm not into ice hockey, but I read that one because I read the others and I thought, these can't really miss. And as we say, he was the
ice hockey one is really good. Because he's not very good at ice skating, which is kind
just shit at ice skating, yeah. And that's what's really good about it, is that he takes on these challenges when he doesn't really claim to have any kind of athletic ability. There was someone else who did this. So Paul Gallico, who was a famous American sports writer from around about the same time, maybe a bit earlier. He was earlier actually. I think he took up a challenge to do a few rounds with Dempsey, and I hope I'm getting this right. I'm sure it was Dempsey and possibly Tunney, but I'm pretty sure it was Dempsey. And he kind of fancied himself a bit because he was like an oarsman at an Ivy League college in America. And I think he thought he was a bit of a specimen. And of course, this doesn't mean you're going to be up to the job. But I think there was a bit of ego there with him thinking, yeah, I can probably do this. Whereas with Plimpton, it was just like, mate, like this is going to be an absolute fucking fiasco, but I'm just going to give it a crack anyway.
It's like in Paper Lion, what he really wants to like take part in a play, in a play for the football team that he's kind of embedded with, and his one chance, I think it's in a training game, and his like one chance finally comes, but I think he's so nervous that he gets thrown the ball and ends up just sort of falling, basically falling over without even throwing it, and that's his one contribution to the team. But it's hilarious.
But it's it's brilliant. It's brilliant, and it does kind of. He's really. What's good about people who are just honest about things is that he's not trying to. This isn't some kind of book where he's trying to say or hint at least that, oh well, maybe if I'd taken it more seriously and trained harder when I was younger, I could have been a contender. He's not saying that. He's highlighting and only too happy using his own shortcomings, but not just his own shortcomings, to just illustrate very starkly just how good these people are and just how very, very fucking far away your average Joe is from being able to do a single thing that they do. And that's what John's kind of describing there in the NFL one. It's great. It's really good. Anyway, the second one, A Flame of Pure Fire, Jack Dempsey in the Roaring Twenties. I'm the same. I find the 20s absolutely fascinating, not just from the boxing point of view, from the, as you said, from the social point of view. It's a decade where all sorts was going on in America, seemingly.
Yeah. I'm really interested in that period of history, and it's when America was sort of becoming the modern superpower that it is today. But it was just a really interesting time. And Dempsey's life, starting out as a hobo, riding on the railroads. I think they'd hold like underneath the railway carriages so they couldn't get thrown off or something. It sounds incredibly dangerous.
I've never quite worked it out, but they describe it as riding the rods, don't they? Like Stanley Ketchell did the same thing, and loads of fighters did the same thing. I think you're hanging upside down, aren't you? Kind of clutching onto something, and people, and if you get tired and lose your grip, then you die. Basically, it's.
Speaking as someone who rarely has successfully managed to do a pull-up, I wouldn't fancy my chances.
No, I wouldn't either.
Under one of these. But yeah, I love it. And these Dempsey starts out doing that, fighting in barrooms to get his dinner, and then becomes, a complete superstar. And in whatever the financial equivalent would have been, earning absolute fortunes, part of the first $1 million gate, etc. It's completely from the Dust Bowl of America to the very height of the glitz and glamour of the 20s. Al Capone's around in the country, all sorts is going on, all these fascinating characters. And this book is particularly good. It really, as well as the boxing stuff in it, it really sort of paints a picture of the country and the history at that time.
Yeah, it does. It does. And it's what I love about it is that period is that this stuff, you'll get the odd apocryphal tale, but it's not that long ago. And so these things definitely happened. It's definitely true, but it does feel really kind of sort of otherworldly because of the other characters. You've got like Doc Kearns, his manager. His background is kind of this similar to Dempsey's, but the kind of jobs he had, he was a gold prospector. He was a human trafficker at one point. Doc Kearns, he's doing all sorts of things and working in these incredibly dodgy, wild kind of mining towns and prospecting towns. And then you got Tex Rickard as the promoter, who just changed boxing completely. It went from being something that was going to the boxing was seen as something that, you just really, it was a real low rent kind of activity. People with any kind of profile or reputation just wouldn't be seen there. It was just a load of men in a club room somewhere relentlessly smoking. And then all of a sudden it was in stadiums and ringside seats were going for hundreds of dollars, and women were going to fights which they'd never done before, and celebrities were going, and it was just the biggest ticket in town. It was, yeah, it's mad. I mean, you look at the I was watching Boardwalk Empire not that long ago, and that's set around that exact period. Atlantic City kind of exploded. Women get the vote. Music, fashion, all sorts of things just really kicked off, and everybody seemed to loosen up a bit. And Dempsey was right at the front of it. But the whole time you have prohibition, which is weird because everybody seems to be kind of having a great time. But technically, you're not supposed to be able to buy booze. But that added to it because you could in certain places. And yeah. I mean, there were so many things, aren't there? But I've never quite worked out how nobody's made a film about his fight in Shelby, the sack of Shelby. It's just unbelievable, that, isn't it? It's just an unbelievable story. It's a Coen Brothers film all day. I don't know why they haven't done it.
Yeah, and there's so many kind of episodes like that in his life. When I was reading this book, I was thinking, how has this not been made into a film or, a 10-part series? Actually, maybe we shouldn't mention this and try and acquire the TV rights ourselves, because it's just, it's got everything from, Prohibition America, gangsters, gambling, those elements of the Wild West when Dempsey's going out to mining towns to have a fight. It's just, it's brilliant. It's another world.
And the fights as well, Carpentier, that was a huge fight. Louis Firpo was this wild fight where all sorts happened in 4 minutes of action, in which just knockdowns all over the place. He got knocked clean out of the ring. There was just drama everywhere. And then the way it kind of finished, he had a lengthy absence from the ring as well in the middle. And then the way it finished with Gene Tunney, just an unbelievable decade, really.
Enough said.
Yeah, I think so.
The only thing I don't like about this book is the title, The Flame of Pure Fire. Like, what else is a flame of? Shouldn't it just be, isn't this just too many words?
Yeah, as you say, Jack Dempsey in the Roaring Twenties, I think that would do the job fine, wouldn't it? I think that would do the job fine. But it's a great choice, and it's a brilliant book because one of the things that makes boxing so interesting is its kind of social history. And he was just on the crest of a wave during the 1920s. And then, of course, pretty swiftly, well, at the back end of the 1920s, you had the Great Crash and the Depression. But yeah, how nobody's made a film about Dempsey or Ketchel as well. Stanley Ketchel came before. I just don't really know, because last year I watched that 8-part series on Netflix about Carlos Monzon, and I really enjoyed it. And he definitely had an interesting life, but not as interesting as Dempsey and Kearns and people like that. So I don't really, I can't figure it out. out.
Yeah, what I really liked about this as well is that Dempsey, sort of like Muhammad Ali, was kind of summed up the spirit of the age, the civil rights movements in the 60s, Vietnam War, and what he came to represent. And sort of the life of Jack Dempsey sums up the spirit of America, in that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to selection number 3.
Yes,
already the aforementioned
there it is.
Joshua by our esteemed guest. So just tell people how this happened, first of all.
Well, I started working for Boxing News in 2010. So I was an editorial assistant then, kind of, covering a lot of the kind of London amateur boxing scene. And that coincided with certain, Anthony Joshua appearing for Finchley on the circuit. So I was watching him, in random bouts in London. And then so I was kind of fortunate enough to be ringside for his rapid ascent, not only for just, but from boxing and, back room of a pub in Tufnell Park to, getting on the GB squad, winning the ABA's glorious amateur world championships campaign in Azerbaijan, the London Olympics, then on to everything he's done, as a pro. So it came out of all the the notes I'd kept and all the stuff I'd seen from following his amateur career into the pros. And then luckily enough, he was good enough to become a unified heavyweight world champion. And I was quite fortunate as a writer to have been in a position where I'd seen someone not just start out with their pro debut, but I'd seen them sort of, I'd followed him all through his amateur days, seen him evolve as a fighter. And I think that's quite unique. I can't think of a book where the writer was kind of there for the heavyweight champion, kind of starting out before he even went to the Olympics, or before he even had his first pro fight.
So did you pitch it to someone, or did someone ask you to do it? I don't know how these things work. So how did the whole thing get off the ground?
So I think I had an idea, like watching like the world championships and the Olympics, it was like, that alone is a great story. Someone going, in the space of 4 years from getting, from borrowing a pair of boxing boots to winning an Olympic gold medal is a pretty amazing thing. So I knew it was a good story, and I had a load of material on it. And my original idea was, as well as the story of Anthony Joshua, to sort of tell the stories of other boxers along the way who were sort of part of the same GB team, follow them into the pros and that kind of thing. But then because Joshua became, he is such a big character, he is such a big story in British sport, he very quickly became the star, and then the other characters got sort of subsumed as almost subplots in the whole narrative. But it's quite, so I still write a bit about how the other boxers got on who was on the same squad with, so you could sort of see Luke Campbell's progression in contrast to Tom Stalker's progression in the Olympics and that kind of thing. So I had all this sort of material from the early days of his career, and then once he became and that hadn't got off the ground, but once he became world champion, I spoke to someone at Jersey Press, and they were all up for it. And so then I wrote the sort of the final chapters of the book, which finishes with him ascending to the top of the sport.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say there that you could have written a really interesting thing about all of them basically, and where they've gone since London and stuff like that. And you could still do that, but when the commercial realities of the situation take over, don't they? And the publisher's going to say to you, no, mate, this needs to be about Anthony Joshua. Oh, but I've got this great stuff on. No. This needs to be about Anthony Joshua. I've had a similar kind of situation, ish, recently, where I've had an idea for a radio documentary, which looks like I'm going to end up doing. And I thought it would be about one thing, and it kind of still is, but there's somebody involved in that who's just a much more famous than anybody else. So they said, yeah, you can do it, but it basically needs to be about him. And I thought, right, okay. It's not a massive problem as I imagine it wasn't for you, but that's what happens, isn't it? So
yeah. But also for this book, when someone's a heavyweight and a heavyweight champion, it does kind of, it takes everyone's attention. So they're going to be, especially if if they're winning and being successful, they're going to be the sort of star of the story kind of naturally as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, as you say, that's just the reality. So is it a bit daunting? I mean, I can just picture this scene almost, kind of the one you see in films when someone's writing a book or whatever. They sit down, open their laptop and put chapter one, and then sort of fold their arms and sit there, go and have a sandwich. I mean, did you have to think to yourself, right, how do I write a book? Because it's a serious undertaking, even if you've got all your memories and your notes and there's nothing better than first-hand recollections. But what was the process? How did you do it? Well, you probably had to jog your own memory about a lot of things, did you?
Yeah. I mean, I've been failing to write books for quite a long time, which I think helps. I think I think the first time I wrote a pitch to an agent was, maybe when I was a teenager. The first one could have been when I was 14 or 15 for a science fiction epic that sadly has never seen the light of day. So I've failed to get books published quite a lot, but I'm used to writing vast amounts that never go anywhere or see the light of day. So I'm used to handling a large amount of material. And it helps. It helps that I was kind of, for everything that I write about in the book, I was there for it. So, obviously, I carefully kept all my notebooks and that kind of thing, and could like refresh my memory and that kind of stuff, which also helped. And then I think, maybe because I'd had this idea of having all these other characters in it as well, that that even though I didn't use all of that material, it helped sort of tell the story in that you're charting someone's progression from, through the sport, from starting out to getting to the top. And then you have other characters whose paths go in different ways. So it kind of helps inform the main storyline and sort of, point you in the direction of where you're going.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think if you start with the idea that you're covering a big picture and then someone kind of emerges from that picture, and you still do it, and that's how you do it. Obviously, you're going to be homing in on them from the beginning, but that's how you do it. Really, that's just going to give it so much more context, isn't it? Without even really trying, because that's what you wanted to do in the first place.
Also, I wanted to write about amateur boxing and what it's like, and contrast that to professional boxing and what that side of the sport and what that business is like. So there's a lot to say and a lot to cram in there, which is great, having a sort of central character to follow through it. But it's also not only about Anthony Joshua, it's also a boxing book about, the state of boxing today and that kind of thing.
I guess when you think about it, we all have points in our career, and hopefully we've both got a long way to go yet. But that period where you're watching these GB fighters really come through in that Olympic cycle quite early in your career at Boxing News, as you say, and they did really well in Baku, and then they do really well in London, and it's in London. I mean, at points are you kind of sitting there thinking, number one, this is an absolute result that it just so happens we've got this crop of fighters and they're winning all these medals. And number two, and not in a pessimistic way, but just kind of, this probably isn't going to happen again. In fact, with the London aspect, this definitely isn't going to happen again.
Yeah, it helped that London 2012 was just, it was a really special event. It felt like a special 2 weeks to be a part of, and you knew it was never going to happen again. So it was quite a bit of a crash afterwards when you're like, this sort of sporting highlight is never going to be repeated. Just the atmosphere, and then what happened on the boxing side of things as well. And also, well, it's almost what I really liked about writing this is what I kind of like about, because I follow amateur boxing really closely. It's really good seeing people make it, because, let's say Anthony Joshua were to beat Tyson Fury and becomes an undisputed heavyweight champion. That would be incredible, and he'd make a fortune. But he's already made it. Like when he beat Klitschko, that sort of put him into the stratosphere. He was always going to, whatever fights he's had, he was always going to make a lot of money. But it's when you're in the amateurs, and if you win that quarterfinal, you get an Olympic medal, and that moment is going to change your entire future, and they know it. And you see what happens to a boxer who, like Thomas Stocker, who's unlucky not to get an Olympic medal, what direction then his career goes in. For Anthony Joshua, that moment of changing his entire life was in a couple of days at the XL at London 2012, getting that Olympic gold medal. And that's, it's a really exciting story to see, seeing someone make it and change their lives and go from, go from the bottom to the top, which sounds like a bit of a cliche, but it's being there for the turning points. And that happens in amateur boxing because you're kind of toiling hard in obscurity, and then you need that one chance or that one opportunity to turn everything around for you. And that's actually, encapsulated by the story of Anthony Joshua, but you see it, with it, with other boxers today. It's maybe to a smaller degree, but it's still an amazing thing. It's kind of what I love about amateur boxing and the sport.
So did you feel like you kind of got to know him a bit when you're on the road watching him as an amateur, and then in his early days as a pro? What I'm interested in there really is, when he turned over and he became this sort of big star, was it still the case that, he might see you at a press conference and there'd just be a little bit of a little nod between the two of you? It's almost like a secret acknowledgement that, yeah, I know you, John. You were there back in the day.
I don't know, maybe in the early days. I certainly feel like you get to know someone when you're, speaking to them in and around doing the ABAs, when you're out at one of these tournaments overseas and that kind of thing. You get to know, you do get to know them. And, in Anthony Joshua's case, he was always like a thoughtful person. He was always, he was always kind of a bit guarded. And I can understand how when someone becomes a superstar, they get even more guarded. But he was still, when his back was against the wall, when, back then he was an underdog in what he was doing. And so you knew he had that character, that kind of fighting spirit. So I think through the amateurs, you do get to, build relationships with people and, and get to know them a bit.
Yeah, I think so. I spent quite a lot of time with the Rio Olympians on that Olympic cycle, and it definitely gives you that more vested interest, doesn't it, when they turn professional? With back to the kind of discipline of writing the book. So what happens? Do they say we need you to finish a first draft by this stage, or do they say we need you to do the first 5 chapters by this date and then send them to us and we'll have a chat and we'll tell you whether we think they're any good or not? I mean, what happens?
So, well, with me, because I didn't have a deal or a deadline, I had a long time to sort of work on my initial material and sort of write the first half of the book, which is very enjoyable because I love writing, I love spending time with those stories, those characters. So when I first approached them, then they asked to see what I had. So I sent them and then sent it. And then eventually, things progressed to the point where I think it was around the time he was about to fight Klitschko. And I liked what Yellow Jersey were offering, because basically they wanted to bring out hardback before the Klitschko fight. Then I'd write a new chapter for the paperback, which sounded good to me. And but it meant that I'd had plenty of time for most of it, but then the sort of second half, I was on quite a tight deadline, which I wanted to be on. So I didn't really have too much time to think about it. I just had to get my head down and work on it. And so I had a deadline to meet, and the publisher was really good because the editor did edit it and was really helpful. The great thing about having an editor working on your stuff like that is you can take all the credit for the good stuff they bring to it. And it also had a proofreader, a fact checker. So it was quite an exacting process, but it was really good. But it was because I wanted to do it in time for the Klitschko fight, it was quite a tight deadline at the end, so I was physically pretty tired afterwards.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But I'm also, my day job is writing about boxing for Boxing News, and that's a lot of pages every week and a lot of web space on the interweb that needs to be filled. So I am used to, my sort of writing muscles have been hardened by by my day job. So I was ready for it.
So was there any point at which I guess not, because as you said, you wrote half of it and then you took it to the publisher, but did they at any stage say, should we reach out to Anthony Joshua and see if this can be an authorized autobiography or an authorized biography? I guess it was never going to end up being his autobiography because he'll have his own plans for that. But did they suggest kind of seeing if you could get him involved?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what conversations were held with Joshua's team and the publisher, but there was contact, and it ended up with Yellow Jersey having to make very clear that it was an unauthorized biography. So that just is what it is. But I don't mind it being an unauthorized biography because all books are unauthorized, and I think and I like reading unauthorized biographies. Obviously, there's a huge place and a huge market for first-person official autobiographies, which is, that sports star's version of events. But the great thing about a biography that's written by an independent journalist is obviously it's truthful and factual, but it's also, you can fill in the wider context. It's not just from the sort of star's point of view. They're a character in the story. You write about what you witness, but you also speak to and interview other people, and you can go into digressions about the sort of wider picture about other characters and take a sort of wider view of the sport as well. So those are the kind of books I like to read. So I was quite happy with how it turned out.
Yeah, they're exactly the kind of books that I would prefer to read as well, because for all the reasons you just mentioned there. Autobiographies can be really interesting. It depends how they're done. I mean, I remember kind of in the mid-90s, the first one that came out of this kind of genre was Tony Adams's book. And when I say of this kind of genre, it was when sports people started to write searingly honest autobiographies rather than I scored my first hat-trick when I was 6 and I won the FA Cup and I was over the moon. Because up until that point, that's what they generally have been. And
Andre Agassi's one was quite like that.
Yeah,
as well.
Agassi's was like that. Yeah. Niall Quinn wrote one which was really good, and they just lift the lid a bit. But an active fighter's never going to do that. So that's why this. I mean, it had to be unauthorized, didn't it? Because otherwise you're getting yourself embroiled in all sorts of things, and you're having potential limitations put on you. And although it might sound great for it to be kind of like official for want of a better word, because you were there, you saw it all. You don't need anyone to kind of interpret that. There was no guesswork going on here. These are your first-hand recollections. Is he the same guy now, do you think? I mean, he can't be, can he? Really? People say, "Oh, you've changed," when people get success, but of course you have to. When you become mega famous like he is, you can't be the same kid that you saw in the Boston Dome up the top of the boozer in Tufnell Park. He can't be, can he? But do you recognise that the same person is still kind of there?
Yeah, but we all, as we get older and our life experiences change, we do. I don't mean change as in, oh, you're a different person. I mean
grow up.
Yeah, and evolve. And also, when you're at the kind of level that he is, doing the kind of things that he does with the scrutiny, with the pressure, it's different. It is kind of excruciating pressure. And I'm not saying that people need to be sorry for a multimillionaire making even more millions, but it's a difficult, dangerous sport, and it's a hard, heavy, juicy sport, especially at heavyweight, fighting the people he's got to fight. It's just, it is a different world there. You can't be the sort of, not necessarily carefree, but reckless fighter with everything to gain when you're taking on Camarelli in Baku in front of thousands of local Azeris. It's just, you know, it is a different world, and you've got to be more guarded because, you know, when you're famous like that, everything you say gets trawled over by the papers, by less brilliant journalists than myself, or less brilliant pundits than yourself. You know, it's not, you know, it's not, it's just, it is just different. But, you know, he still seems to be about the same kind of things that he was always about. Like, he's clearly working phenomenally hard to achieve what he wants to achieve. He clearly cares about what he means to other people and what he represents to other people. You know, in sport, we always talk about people being role models, and I'm not saying a boxer has to be a role model. I don't think they've got a sort of obligation to be one, but, you know, if they want to be, they can be praised for that, and I think that's something that Anthony Joshua has taken on. But yeah, it's just what you're going through as heavyweight champion of the world as we speak, hopefully closing out negotiations to top fight Tyson Fury in the biggest fight Britain's ever seen, and you know, one of the biggest heavyweight fights since Lennox Lewis was around. It's just, you know, it's historic, but it's different. And this is my book is about a different story than becoming undisputed heavyweight champion. And it's about someone who turns their life around through amateur boxing and then professional boxing.
Yeah, I think he's done well with it. I think it's a very difficult thing to handle, and I agree. I don't think necessarily it shouldn't be an obligation or an expectation that top athletes are role models. Everybody can go about their business the way they choose to, but I think he's definitely trying. He's definitely trying to do that, and he's definitely done a hell of a lot more right than he's done wrong. Everybody's going to make the odd mistake every now and again. I can't think of any major ones that he's made off the top of my head, but it's pretty relentless, and he's private too. You don't ever see him in the newspapers really, outside of when he's got a fight. And
but that I don't think that's like out of character. You know, so like when he was an amateur and, you know, early on in his pro career, you know, we you know, I could ring him up and that kind of stuff. But, you know, he'd got to know me by then. He was always you know, he was never a kind of all access, open to all areas of his life person, which is fine. You know, I write for a specialist sports website. I write about the boxing, and this particular book is about the boxing. It's not. It's very much a boxing story, which is what I covered and what I'd written about before, and what I wanted to write for this. And I don't think, you know, I don't need to. You know, I don't. You know, he hasn't changed and become more private. I think he was always fairly private.
Yeah, he's got that same bunch of friends around him now as I imagine he always did. Certainly, I've seen him since the start of his pro career, and he's had the same group of boys who come to his fights, and, you know, you see the same faces all the time. And people talk a lot about the dangers of letting the wrong people in and all those types of things. And I think he's very successfully avoided those kinds of pitfalls. So before we go, I'm going to ask everybody this, I think, because it's a big question in the arena of boxing writing. Quite a difficult one, though. What do you think it is about boxing that has made it such a rich source of some of the best sports writing we've seen for the last 100, well, since really newspapers came into existence? Because there's been so much good stuff written about boxing, whether it's articles or whether it's books, and then a lot of that is translated to films, of course, screenplays and stage plays, all that kind of thing. It seems to have something that no other sport has.
Yeah, it's hard to say what makes it so unique, because there have been so many good boxing books. There's so many good boxing films as well. You know, maybe it's because boxing it's just sort of, by the time you get down to the fight, it is pure conflict. It's pure drama. It's just one-on-one, and then especially with a book where you've got the sort of deeper context of what has brought these fighters to this moment of their fight, of what it means to them to win or what it will mean to them to lose. That's just the kind of pure stuff of drama, and it reveals character. It has incredible characters involved in it. And yeah, it's just, I guess boxing is just the pure stuff of drama, I suppose.
No, it's a hard question because it's a big question, and nailing it down with any kind of definitive answer is basically impossible. I think it's just, as you say, it's all those ingredients that you can think of, the drama inside the ring, the stories outside of the ring, what they go on to in their later lives, how they got there in the first place, the kind of characters who hang around it, the social history of it, as we touched on before with the 20s and Dempsey and fighters of other eras. It's just, there's nothing quite like it.
Yeah, I think part of it is the history of the sport. Like, you might not, Anthony Joshua might not be Muhammad Ali, but he is a world heavyweight champion, and he is following in a tradition that has seen fighters and people like Lennox Lewis, Muhammad Ali, Jack Dempsey. You can go back even further. There is something about the history of boxing that gives it this unique prestige, as well as something about the nature of the sport itself, that it's not a real fight, but it's definitely not a play fight either. And there's something revealing about the people who are involved in it. And I don't know if it's just because it's a fight, but I haven't read books about kickboxing or MMA that there's sort of kind of do what books about boxing do. So I don't know why it's just boxing. Maybe it is the history of it, but I guess that's why people can keep writing about it, because there are all these mysteries in the sport.
That's it. It's that kind of, that sort of, I don't know what the word would be, almost ethereal aspect to it, which means that it is difficult to explain. And the fact that it's difficult to explain in itself explains why people find it so fascinating. And I don't think that's going to finish anytime soon, because it's always easy to look at bygone eras and think that they were richer somehow. The tapestry was richer, but you look at the scene at the minute and you look at how constantly things are changing and evolving in all sorts of different ways. Maybe it's not as it's not as big as it was in New York in the 90s or London in the 1920s and 30s, but that's just because society changes and things change. But I'm confident that people will always want to watch boxing. Every now and again, you hear people say, "Oh, well, it's gonna have its day soon in this modern." People always like to say PC, don't they? In this modern PC society, how can you still have this? But I don't see it going anywhere. I really don't.
Well, yeah, there are worse things people can do with their lives than be boxers.
Yeah, there are. So anyway, are there any plans afoot for future books? Have you thought about anything? I mean, you said right at the start, it's got to be something you really, I mean, you can't be half-hearted about it, because you've got to put an unbelievable amount of work into it and find it utterly fascinating every step of the way, I guess, because if you don't, then you begin to wonder whether anybody else will be interested in reading it if you're losing interest in it.
Yeah. No, there are a couple of ideas I'm working on, but I won't bore you with the details today. But yeah, I'm doing my best. But I failed to get a lot of books published before I got my first one published, so I'm sure I've got plenty more failures in the tank before I get my second one published.
Fail forward, John. Fail forward. Failure is our friend. Absolutely.
So I'll just try and fail quicker this time, so it doesn't take me,
The
17 years to get a book published.
It does seem though, it really does seem to me that, I mean, so many things people will say it's all down to perseverance and all the rest of it, but writing books is one that seems to demand a pretty savage amount of persistence. I don't know what the stat is, but I think I'm going to make this up now, but it's something pretty. It is something pretty mind-boggling. Like, it's on average somebody's 5th or 6th completed book that they need to write before they get one published. And I mean, I'm just amazed that anyone keeps going that long. It's.
Yeah, I certainly would. This perfect point to finish on. I wouldn't recommend the miserable life of a boxing writer to anyone. There must be better things out there. I'm probably just not good at anything else.
Well, yeah, that probably is. That probably is the right place to finish. But John's a modest man. He's a modest man because I'm sure there is more to come. I'm absolutely convinced of the fact that there's more to come. You've got a few more in you. You think, Plimpton had a few in the tank, didn't he? So I don't know when he got his first one over the line. How old were you then when this came out?
So it came out in, what was I, 36 or something? 35 when it first came out.
That's pretty good, isn't it? I think that's quite young, isn't it?
Yeah, but I'm 38 now. The years have flown by. And also, what's really bad is when I was young, in my 20s, I could look at people getting books published and then see how old they are and be like, he's in his 30s.
I've got loads of time. Yeah.
So, but now, now I'm 38. People are being successful. And I'm here in my room talking to you.
We're all just sitting in our rooms at the minute. This is the apex of anybody's ambition these days.
This is true. I'll take that back. It doesn't get better.
And partake in Zoom meetings. Okay, well, we'll wrap it up there. John, that was loads of fun. Thanks very much for doing it. And like I said,
thank you for getting me on the first episode of the book club, or thank you for letting me invite myself onto the first episode of the book club.
I'm all for that. I'm all for people inviting themselves on. Absolutely. So if anybody's watching this who fancies a crack, you do need to have written a book. That's, to be a guest, you do need to have written a book. Yeah, that's one qualification that is non-negotiable. I just wanted to expand this out a bit and have a chat with a few people who've actually been down this road and see what their favourites were. And your two selections are going to take a lot of beating in my book, certainly. Shadowbox by George Plimpton, just in case people are forgotten, and The Flame of Pure Fire, Jack Dempsey, and The Roaring Twenties by, is it Roger Kahn?
Roger Kahn.
And then the authorised biography, Joshua, by John Dennen.
Well, the unauthorised biography.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
You said the authorised.
Yeah.
So that hasn't appeared yet.
No. The unauthorised, it very clearly says that there. I don't want a legal letter from 258 management. So, okay, we'll wind it up there. I will be back next week. I'm not sure if I have a guest with me next week or not. Week after that,
I'll just stay on the Zoom call. I'll just lurk in here. So when you're next week, I'll still be there.
Why not? Absolutely, why not? At the week after that, actually, I'm going to be in Poland for the World Youth Championships, and hoping to do quite a lot of stuff over there. Do some kind of just sneaky bits of sort of fly on the wall and make Macklin's Take the unauthorized YouTube channel for the World Youth Championships 2021. I don't think IEBA will mind that. They don't.
No, especially as you'll be quarantined in your hotel room. So
that's it. Yeah, exactly. I don't know how interesting that could be, really.
Just you alone in a hotel, eating borscht, feeling sorry for yourself. Put it on pay-per-view.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. God,
I'm sorry. I don't know if they eat borscht in Poland.
I'm all of a sudden not. It doesn't sound like quite such an appealing trip now, but. Okay. Enough of our nonsense. Thanks very much for tuning in, everybody. If you could click subscribe, if you've managed to get to the end of this, if you've watched it all the way through, then surely you want to subscribe to the channel. I mean, your actions of the previous 55 minutes make no sense whatsoever if you don't now click subscribe. So please do that, and we will be back with you again soon.
I feel like if someone has made it all the way through to the end of this, they deserve some sort of prize. I'll send them a copy of the paperback of Joshua by John Dennen. I don't know how they can prove. How would you prove that you've made it through to the end, though?
I don't know. I suppose. Well, if in the comment section you reference this part of our conversation, then you must have watched all the way through to the end. So the first person to do that in the comment section, and you must subscribe as well, of course. John's going to lob you a paperback edition of his book. Can't say fairer than that. Cannot say fairer than that. Okay, that's it for this one. We will see you next week for episode 3.